I believe the media is a tool with which art, opinions and beliefs can be shared almost indiscriminately to a vast global audience. The reception of media content is therefore interpreted and seen through the eyes of the individual, whose perception is affected by their experience, their values and their beliefs. It is from this basic premise that differences of opinion occur and factual evidence can become skewed or ignored within a wider context of tension or panic around events which are inherently sensitive and emotional, such as a school shooting or the depiction of violence against women. My argument is that video games which incorporate violence are not bad for society, and that it is in fact the media outlets which misinform and confuse the public that are bad for society. If you've ever watched a program like A Current Affair, Today Tonight, 60 Minutes, or read a newspaper like the Courier Mail or the Australian, you will most likely be exposed to a range of views and beliefs to which you may or may not agree with. I use these examples because their popularity and availability indicate that they are consumed by a proportionately large number of people relative to the population of Australia. A prime example of media frenzy which sparked social backlash against popular video games was the fallout from the Sandy Hook school shooting in 2012. On the morning of December 14, 2012, a 20-year-old named Adam Lanza shot and killed his mother and then drove to a nearby school and killed another 26 people, most of which were young children. He then turned the gun on himself. Adam Lanza was quickly portrayed in certain popular news media as having been an antisocial loner who spent most of his time gaming. While this is in and of itself true, during the weeks that followed the massacre, the points that were focused on became almost exclusively Adam Lanza's Asperger's syndrome and the games, like Call of Duty and Grand Theft Auto, that were found in his room after his death. Almost a year later, well after public interest in Sandy Hook had waned and the highly public debate was over, the state of Connecticut released a detailed report which found that while Adam Lanza did play many video games, which incorporated shooting and violent aspects, his two most played games were Super Mario Bros. And Dance Dance Revolution. This well-publicized case of public backlash against a specific form of media can be characterized well by David Gauntlет's 10-part critique of the media effects model. Amongst other things that Gauntlet points out, the specific nature of the criticism against violent video games was done, and is still done, while excluding criticism of other violent forms of media. The criticism of media for affecting behavior is clearly formed on conservative foundations, which in itself led to a distinction between which forms of violence are perceived as acceptable to portray and which are not. A key factor in the ability to separate violent video games from other forms of violent media and terrify people with the threat of creating deranged lunatics out of harmless children is the removal of context. The ability to decontextualize a game is the ability to present people with an image of pure violence with no cause or justification or underlying message whatsoever. As Dr. Harrington discussed in class, there are people who are not above taking lyrics from a comedic parody song and presenting them as a genuine example of youth culture and the treatment of women. A good example of games being stripped of their meaning and portrayed as sexually deviant and misogynistic can be found in the work of Anita Sarkeesian. While she makes good points about the role women play and need to play in the creation of games, both as developers and as characters, her tendency to create a false narrative with quick edits and misleading information about a game is a practiced art in deception. In a video by Thunderfoot, a famous YouTuber, he demonstrates quite clearly that Sarkeesian deliberately misleads her audience by telling them that a game wants you to abuse and mistreat scantily clad women at the back of a bar. The game in question is Hitman, which in reality requires that the player proceed through the level unseen. The problem is very simply that a lot of people don't know enough about games to know that they are not created to disempower women or portray them purely as objects for sexual gratification. If someone who is as trusted as Anita Sarkeesian, who has now been on the Colbert Report, can make false claims of this magnitude about a popular game and get away with it, there is definitely a serious discord between the general public's perception of games and the truth behind video games as an art form. A recent long-term study completed in 2014 by Dr. Christopher Ferguson found conclusively that both violent video games and films were not correlated in any meaningful way at all, other than to show a slight decrease in actual violence when video game violence increased. On the back of this conclusive data, which effectively ends the conversation about video game violence and its influence on real-life violence, I have to reaffirm my position that while violent video games are not bad for society, everyone should start to feel like the media which deliberately misinforms us is very bad for society.